Welcome aboard the Athletics Can't Wait Jets podcast, your nonstop shop for all things Jets with Tim McMaster, Zack Rosenblatt, and Marissa Dunn.
Can't wait.
Good morning, everyone. If you're joining us in the morning, if you're catching up on the audio later, hello to you as well. Owners meetings in Orlando, Florida are, I guess, winding down at this point. All the Jets brass spoke on Monday. Zack was there. He was there to soak it all in, along with the sunshine down there in Orlando. We're going to get you all caught up. Thanks for joining the Can't Wait podcast. Tim McMaster here with Zack Rosenblatt and Marissa Dunn, our producer. Zack, I said you were soaking it all in, and I think working hard. Marissa, if you want to pull up yeah, well, that was the question from
Janae.
Coakley, of course. Janae Coakley, of course, from SNY. If you're not watching on YouTube, she posted this great picture of Connor and Zack on a bench. Connor on his phone, Zack on his laptop. Zack appearing to be working a lot harder than Connor. But with the comments, hardly working with Connor and then working hard.
So
what's the truth?
The truth is we were working equally. We were both killing time equally in that we both weren't. We were both killing time while we were waiting for Joe Douglas's availability. And so I literally just had my laptop out, just like scrolling Twitter and like texting people.
So you looked a little more.
I looked more official. But
yes.
On the
although he's wearing a suit, so he looks.
Yeah, so he looks more official.
Suit top. He has jeans on.
Yeah.
So.
People have a tendency to take like a photo of us when we're sitting near each other. It's really annoying. It's like a lot of paparazzi going on. But I will say, just quick sidetrack. Like so I stayed at a hotel. I like switched to a different hotel this week, just because I wanted to get one closer to the owners' meetings. And then I like without even like looking into it really. And then I get to it. It's like a full on like resort, and I got like it was like cheap relatively to like all these other hotels around.
Yeah, make sure you include that in there in case any.
No, I did. Like, that's why I did not expect when I pull up and it's like a full on like freaking resort with like families, and I'm like the only me and Diana, we both booked this one.
Okay,
we're like the only NFL people here, we think. But anyway, long story short, I discovered there's like a golf course on here, and I tell Connor about it, and he's like, "Oh, I need to golf there," because he brought his golf clubs. So he comes and like golfs by himself under like my name the other day, but he left his golf clubs in my car for like multiple days, and last night I'm like, I kind of hope he doesn't remember, and I'll just like get rid of his golf clubs or something. Or I told him when he was saying stupid stuff yesterday, I told him I was gonna give his golf clubs some gators in the water, because there's all these warnings if you get near the water like that there might be some like gator or crocodile. I think it's gator.
It's gator.
I gave his clubs back. I shouldn't have. I wanted to toss them in the ocean because he's annoying. And I've spent way too much time with him this week, and I need to go home and get away from him.
He built a golf simulator in his garage.
He did, and he had to tell everybody about it.
Well, and drop the names of all the different companies.
Oh, of course. But I was telling this with a friend of ours.
Connor.
I've spent enough time with Connor to where like I keep hearing him tell the same stories to different people, and he has this like remarkable ability to use all the same words in every story. Like it's like he has a script. And I'm just like, I heard this already. I'm just like nodding my head along. I can't. I mean, it's stuff about like his daughter and stuff, so I can't make fun of him too much.
That's cute.
It's still just like that's when I know I spent too much time with him on a trip. When I hear the same story like for the fourth time, I'm like, I can't do this anymore.
It's time to go home.
Oh man!
All right.
Enough Connor talk.
Yeah, let's talk some football. And before we
do some basketball, Arizona did not lose in the first round. Arizona women did lose to Syracuse. So
yeah, they did.
We didn't have a bet. We probably should have, and I would have.
My bragging rights lasted like 2 days though, because I know a bunch of UConn people, and so Syracuse women beat Arizona and then gave UConn a go yesterday. They were within 3 with a minute to play.
Iowa almost lost too in women's basketball. That was like a close one.
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah. But Arizona's still in the mix. They have to play Clemson.
I have them in the Final Four.
Do you? I can't do that anymore. I've given up on trying to predict that. But Baylor losing has me feeling better. Although it would be very Arizona to go and lose to the team they're supposed to.
I had Clemson beating Baylor and then Arizona beating them. So basically, I'm fingers crossed. I have my whole Elite 8 still, and I had 13 of 16. I'm doing well in the. I have UConn winning it all. I went with the.
They look pretty good.
They get there.
They are very.
I hate UConn so much. But if they get there, it'll be fine, because it'll be like, well, if they win, maybe I'll win money.
Yeah.
And if they lose, yes, they lost. You know, so it's one of those.
I will say, I used to be obsessed with college basketball, and I would know like all the prospects and stuff. It's harder to track it now with all the transfers and stuff. But I like don't keep track during the regular season anymore. But yeah, you still get to March Madness, and it's still just like I can't stop watching. Like I don't know what it is. Like it's the one sport where like you don't even need to follow it all year, and then when you're in it, you're like rooting for teams you've never watched for a second, or you're whatever it is. Like Kentucky losing is just always hilarious early.
Yeah,
early, yeah.
I just love March Madness. So I mean, I'm often disappointed because Arizona is, you would kind of expect the disappointment at this point. So maybe they'll finally switch it up and get to the Final Four. But
Arizona's fun because I love the Caleb Love redemption story.
Yeah,
You know, he's playing so well, and obviously he was so good with Carolina 2 years ago, and then last year I don't know what happened, but
and the Pac-12 was like 6-0 to start out, which is pretty cool. I think they've all lost since then. I think Arizona might be the only team left, but that was cool.
And that's your basketball update.
That's your
there you go. That's your March Madness, and that's the end of the Pac-12 in March Madness.
Yeah, exactly.
Forever. Okay, let's get to the football. Before we get to the Jets stuff, we actually have news this morning from the rules changes that are coming out of the owners' meeting. The big one, little one, trade deadline moved to week 9. Small change there. They banned the hip drop tackle, sort of. If you land on the player's legs that you're tackling, it'll be a 15-yard penalty, automatic first down. If you do the whole same, like grab the player and kind of come off your feet, but you don't land on the player's legs, that's considered a legal tackle. So that'll
going to be a tough one. It's going to be a tough one to enforce. Yeah,
it's going to be like what's a catch.
Yeah, I was about to say it's like and all the penalties they have with like tackling quarterbacks already and stuff, where it's like it doesn't look like anything. It's going to be players have expressed their discontent with it, and everybody. And now you've seen a lot of every time they keep like moving it further away from being able to hit each other, that you might as well give, like JJ Watt was like, you might as well just put them on belts and give attach flags to them at this point, which is extreme, but like you get where he's coming from. And I've seen a lot of Jets fans like celebrating because it's like it's all like memes about like Breece Hall when people try to tackle him now. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. I mean, I think the NFL is also trying to get scoring up because I feel like scoring was down a little bit to a degree. I think defense has gotten better and quarterbacks
maybe because all the backup quarterbacks were playing.
I know, but which is a big part of it. Like I said, quarterbacks have gotten worse, or quarterbacks are injured more often at least. So it's it was an interesting one. I never knew what the heck a hip drop tackle was until like this all started happening, because now you start hearing it over and over and over again.
Yeah, just the last couple of years.
Who comes up with these phrases? I don't know.
Yeah.
And then
the other one, the other one that I think will be somewhat controversial is the kickoff rule. They're taking basically the XFL rule. It's slightly different, but for the most part, the kickers will kick off from the 35-yard line, but the kicking team will line up on the receiving team's 40-yard line. The receiving team, other than 2 players who can be back to receive the kick, will line up between the 30 and the 35. So all the players will be bunched together there. And nobody will be able to move until the ball is either caught or hits the ground. So basically, they're taking the violence out of kickoffs for the most part.
I think they're trying to get it so there can be more returns also.
Yeah.
But
last year, the return rate dropped to 21.7%. Which, I mean, how many times is it just?
I know special teams coordinators are pissed about that.
Yeah.
And that's only going to change so much.
But another aspect of this rule that I saw Thomas Morstead tweeted, because I think he had a famous one in the playoffs, that you have to declare you're doing an onside kick now, so there's no surprise onside kicks, which those are always
the worst
fun.
part of this.
Yeah, I think you're just removing like a fun thing, and I don't really. I guess maybe there's more injury risk when it's a surprise. Maybe I don't know, but those are all. Whenever a team would pull that out, I remember when I was younger watching like the Eagles, they'd like pulled out a surprise one like the first kick of week 1 kind of thing.
Or that's like in the Super Bowl, there's been a couple Super Bowls.
Yeah, so you're kind of removing teams are going to be better prepared for onside kicks, which when you're better prepared is pretty rare for them to work. I mean, they're already rare to work anyway, but I don't know. It's the NFL just. It's always like these little things that they're changing like a little too much of, and like this seems such like a convoluted thing, this kickoff thing, and I don't really just do the kickoffs like they were. Like everybody enjoyed them. I get they're trying to make the game safer, but
you could get rid of the wedge, which they got rid of a few years ago. I think that was a key one. But the thing now is you're only going to raise the return rate so much because so many of these kickers are basically kicking it through the uprights.
Yeah.
kickoff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those balls they're not coming back. You know, they're not getting returned.
Yeah.
So maybe it pumps it up a little bit, but we'll see. We are obviously all for the safety on this stuff, and the high speed collisions of kickoffs is legit. I get that. So we'll see how it plays out. Part of me is like,
does Michael play a lot on special teams? Does he get on the?
He'll only go in on like field goal and extra point.
Yeah, not
that
kickoff,
kind of special
right?
teams, not kickoff. But
Yeah,
I feel like this is going to
maybe
be
he
really...
will now because he doesn't have to run.
True. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
True. But I feel like this is going to be really interesting to watch, like during OTAs and training camp. Like, it's a big adjustment for special teams.
During games, I am not going to be able to remember but like, wait, so where are they lining up? Where do they get the ball now? Yeah.
It could have a huge impact on the game if it's supposed to increase the return rate.
Well, it'll be strategy. There'll be strategy involved, and
yes, and certain teams are going to have a leg up watching all that XFL film that it worked with. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch during OTAs and training camp this summer for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. So as for the Jets, we're going to go through. So everyone's talked yesterday.
Yeah.
Zach, you were there for it. Saleh, Joe Douglas, and even Woody spoke. So you have a great article out on The Athletic right now where you kind of read between the lines of what they said and what they mean or what they didn't want you to know, that sort of thing. So I think we can kind of go through, use that as our structure here and go through all the big stuff that was talked about. Starting with quarterback position and adding another quarterback, which, I mean, they have to do. Obviously, unless,
so that was a rule.
As Woody said, you keep Zach Wilson, but that seems like just something Woody said. So get into this. What's the most likely route for the Jets' number 3 quarterback?
I think Marissa was about to say. I think they were talking about. I don't know if they announced.
Yeah, I think that was the thing before the podcast started to look behind
about
the curtain.
About how you can have an emergency quarterback on your practice squad. Is that what it was?
Yes. Yeah. So that's new, that the third quarterback that you had to have on the roster to be the emergency quarterback, I believe now can be on the practice squad and elevated an unlimited amount of times
in game or
before the game.
Declared emergency. They don't need to be like active, but they can be declared the emergency third quarterback.
And they don't need to have a roster spot.
Yeah, which is what the rule was last year. That's
right, which is huge because that's
relevant for Zach Wilson for sure.
Yes, relevant for Zach Wilson, relevant for an extra offensive lineman, relevant for so back to. Tell us what.
Robert Saleh, in terms of like adding another quarterback, Robert Saleh is like, yeah, we definitely want. I mean, I think he was more talking like we like to have 3 or 4 in camp in general. I don't necessarily think he meant like we need to go and get a stud or anything like that. But he said we're definitely going to add another quarterback. Saleh and Joe Douglas have pretty much talked like Zach Wilson is gone. Though Douglas said there hasn't been any progress on a trade, and there was a Pro Football Talk report, which I don't think was accurate. Frankly, I don't know where it came from, where he said that the Jets have received multiple offers for Zach Wilson, but Woody Johnson has put the kibosh on them. I wouldn't take much credence in that report. It's possible that came from Zach Wilson's camp because they want to make it seem like there's a lot of interest in him, which I get, but I don't think that specifically has happened. I know teams have like asked around about Zach. As Joe said, they've had conversations. It doesn't seem like anything's any closer, and there's very, very limited options now in terms of like teams that like actually make sense. And even the ones that make sense, like just asking around, I'm not really convinced. Like, I don't think, I've said this since the beginning, I don't think the Rams are going to pursue him unless they really want him as like the third quarterback to develop. I'm ranking.
And it's $5.5 million.
Yeah. And you'd have to hypothetically give up something and pay him. I think the Jets would have to attach a pick to him. Anyway, this all leads to like Woody Johnson, who, had his comments at the NFL honors couple months ago where he's like, we didn't have a backup quarterback last year, and everybody took that as pretty harsh criticism of Zach, which it was. He kind of like, I think he learned his lesson maybe, and he went like the complete opposite direction, maybe a little too extreme. I mean, the stuff he said this time made a little more sense. He admitted that they, probably failed him. He said that like the thing that's gotten the most attention, he said, if we don't trade him, we're keeping him, kind of thing. But I don't think that's accurate. I don't think they're going to keep him. When Douglas was asked about that, like shortly before, a couple hours before that, he pretty much is like, we haven't even thought about that. Okay, like we're not doing that. But you don't want to like come out and say like we're cutting him, because then if any team had interest anyway, they're not going to trade for him. Then they'll just wait for you to cut him. But it's a very tough spot. All these quarterbacks have changed teams. A lot of teams have their backups already. Like we were just talking about, not a lot of teams are going to keep a third quarterback. Zach might have to settle for a practice squad spot at this point. Like if they don't get him a trade destination, think there are some teams that still need quarterbacks that are probably going to wait and see what they can do in the draft. Like the Broncos, I think, are the big one. I don't think they're going to go out of their way to go and get Zach Wilson while he's on another team when they're talking about trading up. The Raiders are talking about trading up. Like all these teams that hypothetically need quarterbacks. It would be teams that need a backup. I don't think the 49ers are going to have interest in him. Like I'm writing something about what path this might go down for tomorrow. But yeah, I don't know what's going to happen there. It's taken a turn that I didn't necessarily expect when the offseason started. And now I'm not. The more I talk to people, the less convinced I am that he's even going to be a lock to like be on a team next year, which is pretty crazy to think about. But I think so. The start of my story was like Joe Douglas kind of implying they're open to drafting a quarterback in the first round. I took that more as like, you know, what a GM says or trying to like drum up interest in the number 10 pick. Or I personally don't think it's the worst idea to draft a quarterback in the first round. But the thing is, like, if all the rumors are true, then there's going to be 4 quarterbacks gone before they even get to the Jets pick. And I don't know that the other ones are number 10 overall guys, maybe if they trade back. But I don't think it should be ruled out completely. They maybe haven't ruled it out completely. I know they're doing a lot of homework on the quarterbacks. I don't expect them to pick one in the first round. One thing we've talked about a lot is that they have flexibility now with what they've done in free agency a little bit, even though you could argue they still need a receiver and probably still need a tackle. But yeah, I don't know. Joe Douglas really like stoked the flames there and fans like ate it up. But I wouldn't expect them to draft a quarterback in the first round, even if he's trying to make you think that they will.
So with what you're saying about Zach, it seems like the options here, if they are going to trade him, one is draft night, like in a pick swap type situation.
Yeah.
And then, but is there a world where it's worth hanging on to him and waiting until quarterbacks start getting hurt in training camp? And then maybe you can pull the trigger? Or is that it's just letting it linger too long?
Yeah. I don't know that they would let it linger that long. I do see a scenario where it comes after the draft, though. Like, even if it's not during the draft, like you come, so that in the May to late June range or early, or I guess mid-July, because that, training camp doesn't start till the end of July. So he hypothetically wouldn't even have to report until then, pretty much.
Right. I'd assume he wouldn't attend OTAs.
Yeah. And the Jets usually cancel cancel mini camp these days. So
that is required for players to attend.
Yeah. It's mandatory mini camp unless it's canceled. And then they're fine. But the Jets might say he doesn't have to come since we're trying to trade him also. Like teams do that all the time. So yeah, I could like, that's kind of where my head's at. I don't think they're going to be in a rush to cut him because you don't get any cap savings. And I'm sure Woody's not thrilled about that idea that you're paying this guy $11 million to not play for you. But so I think they'll hold on to him as long as they can, but I don't see it lingering to training camp. So I think sometime between the draft and training camp will be my guess. And then you can start talking future draft picks instead of this year where they don't have as many picks because they like, I think 3 of them are compensatory picks, which are pretty late. And then they don't have a second round pick, and they don't have a 5th round pick, I think, or a 6th. They like lost one of those from a trade they did last year. So, like I think they're going to have to attach a pick to him in order to get him up because I'm sure they want to save that money as opposed to just eating the dead cap. So it's all kind of like wait and see. And I don't get the sense that anybody's like rushing to trade for him, especially now. And I don't know. I thought he could be fine as a backup, but also, like, if you're a team that has aspirations of actually winning games, like, do you want to rely on him being your number 2 quarterback? Like you saw what happened when the Jets did that. Like he needs to be someone who's probably QB3 somewhere and develops. And our team's willing to, invest in him to do that. And I don't know that they are. And it's, I was wrong in my like projection for the offseason with this. I thought there would be teams that would be not banging down their door, but I thought there would be interest. And then you see what Mac Jones is going for, 6th round. Justin Fields is basically going for a 6th round pick, even though incentives can get up to a 4th. Like that's crazy to me.
Yeah.
So and those guys have had more success in the NFL than Zach. Whatever you think about them, I know some Jets fans think Zach's better than one or both of them. Mac Jones had a really good rookie year. Justin Fields has been very dynamic. I don't know. It's a weird spot, but they're not keeping him. I just don't see that happening. No matter what he said, I think that was all smoke.
All right, Mac Jones had a good rookie year when he had a competent offensive coordinator. And then that failed. And you could argue that Zach Wilson maybe has never had that either in his career. And that brings us to the offensive coaching staff. Zach, how about that transition? Robert Saleh asked about Nathaniel Hackett because there was talk about them adding someone, maybe a play caller into the mix. That didn't happen. He said, I know Hackett will be better. When you lose, you're a loser. He went on from there, but I love that little bit. He actually
not only say that he said Joe D is a loser, I'm a loser. Yeah.
I thought that was a really good quote, just kind of owning it. But to me, this just means like we think Hackett will be better when Aaron Rodgers is calling the plays.
Well, I mean, he's also has to say that also. It's not like
Well,
he
yes.
can't be like, we're not confident in him, but this is what we're stuck with. uh, so Diana and I were the ones that reported that they were looking at adding like another coach. And I get the impression that at the very least, like one person I know that they reached out to, and I'm sure I can't imagine that was the only person they did, that they really weren't interested in the job. And it's hard to believe that like a lot of coaches thought this was like an appealing job for them. Even if you're not technically offensive coordinator, like it's Aaron Rodgers really running the offense, and you also have to deal with Nathaniel Hackett being there still. It's kind of a mess. And so Saleh pretty much said like I just decided I was fine rolling with Todd Downing and Hackett, and maybe Todd gets more of a say and stuff. Ultimately, Rodgers the OC, as we've talked about, but in the scenario that you lose him again, like are you going to be okay with Nathaniel Hackett calling the plays? And there's a lot of questions about that, and there's not really much more that I can say about Hackett because I think everybody knows I'm pretty down on him, like the fan base is. But this is kind of who they're rolling with. It's who that's who they decided to hire last year when they fired LaFleur. And you just got to hope that they have all the pieces in place to overcome whatever play calling, minuses they have in a given week. Or if they're losing the play calling matchup, at least you have more talent or something like that. So they're banking on Rodgers, obviously a lot. Tyrod is an upgrade from Zach Wilson, but I still don't know that you're going to win a lot of games with Tyrod. So, yeah, this is the staff they're rolling with. They did make some changes to the staff, as we've talked about, a few position coaches. I asked Saleh if that was with an eye toward like fixing what was wrong on offense. He kind of like pushed back on that. I mean, he's not going to say that, but I imagine that was part of it. Just like finding different people, letting Rob Calabrese go. Like he was a part of the whole situation too. So it's I'm curious to see if the offense looks different in terms of like their philosophy and how they approach things. And I think the running game might be a little different based on the offensive line. I think it's gonna be more of a power running game. But I kind of had a feeling it was going to go that way. Once I knew that at least one guy rejected them, that they wouldn't find somebody to fill that role. And this is the staff they're rolling with in a win now year with everybody in the hot seat. So this is kind of what you got to deal with.
All right. Offensive line has obviously been a success story on paper this offseason. They've filled all these holes, and we didn't know if it would take till the draft or after the draft to do that. It's already taken care of. So Douglas asked about that. He said he feels good about the O-line, but he also loves this draft class, which obviously leaves open the possibility of them taking somebody. Do you think, like, what do you think at number 10 is more likely, receiver or tackle? Or is it just who's there?
Yeah, it's hard to answer because like those three receivers, Adunze from Washington, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison won't fall to 10, but
Right.
like if hypothetically one of those guys fell that far, I don't think you could say no to that. Like, 'cause I think those guys are all going to be like number one receivers in the NFL. You have Mike Williams, who this is, I'm sure, probably the next topic we were going to cover.
Yep.
We
could just jump into it though.
Yeah, because we're talking about receiver, but
yeah,
like he tore his ACL and he's not going to be ready at the start of training camp. Like, so you're really banking on a guy that you don't really know if his explosiveness is still going to be there. Like, you just don't. Like, this is the risk with the guys they've signed. I think Mike Williams is a perfect complement to Garrett Wilson, but he's hurt. And we'll get into the Mike Williams part of things a little more in a second. But so I think if any of those three guys are there, you have to take them in my mind. I 100%. And I get the argument for a tackle. I don't think the tackles are as good of prospects as these receivers. Now, if those three receivers are gone, then you're debating between whether it's Talisi Fuaga from Oregon State, Olufashanu from Penn State, or Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia. I think those become like the three targets I have my eye on, unless you trade back. But I'm a little more skeptical that they'll have really meaningful trade back options, because if four quarterbacks are gone, then people trade up for quarterbacks and sometimes like edge rushers. And I think this is a talented edge rusher class, but it's not. I don't think there's anyone that everybody's going to trade a lot to go up and get guys. So unless they're willing to trade back and let somebody else get one of these receivers, which I think would piss Jets fans off as much as anything.
Rodgers.
And Aaron Rodgers. Like I think they stay at 10. And I think if I'm predicting right now, I think it winds up being Fuaga from Oregon State or Brock Bowers. And Joe Douglas was asked directly, like, there's like some debate about the value of drafting a tight end in the top 10, like just in terms of positionally, the value of that. we actually had a story in The Athletic, Austin Mock, who does like all the projection models for us and stuff. He had something about how like even if they're talent wise, they match up like in terms of like financially, it's not a great investment picking a tight end that early because you wind up having to pay them like a significant amount of money. But you also just need to get good players in the building, which we've learned over the years with Jets. So if Brock Bowers can add an element to this offense and essentially be the number 2 receiver, then you take him. I think if I'm drafting, I think I would pick him over to the offensive lineman. But I 100% get the idea that they should draft a tackle too. We know their luck they've had. They have 2 guys.
I was just going to say, Zach, come on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But like the argument against it, I think, is like, are they really going to draft a guy that's not going to play again? Like,
right.
There's a chance you draft this guy and he doesn't play all year.
Right.
And so that's what the argument. I think
that's a small. I feel like that's a small chance.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Like
you know what I mean? Like he's not going to play.
Backing it up.
I'm just saying that's just something to think about. Like, and they might have that in their head. Although I'm sure they know Tyron Smith is not playing 17 games.
Right.
But
at least
again, and this all kind of ties together. Like they are very high on Carter Warren. I don't know if they're high enough on him to just like not add a third tackle, but they keep emphasizing how much they like him. He didn't have a training camp last year, what I actually forgot about. He was injured to start the season. He's going to be learning from Tyron Smith, so maybe there's some hope there.
It's also a 1-year deal with Tyron Smith, though. So like, I mean, you're going to be back.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I mean, but that's always the debate with like a GM on the hot seat. Like, is he really thinking about the future, or is he thinking about right now? And you lean towards them thinking about right now. Yeah. But yeah, so that's it all kind of their free agent signings in a way give them more flexibility, but you could also argue maybe they didn't because you signed 2 guys that you can't really rely on necessarily. So it's it's gonna be a fascinating draft for them. And they're not done in free agency. I don't think they're gonna do like huge. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney, who we can get into as well. I'm sure we were. He's a possible big splash, but other than that, I don't think it'll be any more big splashes. I think the next big player will be in the draft unless they sign Clowney.
We mentioned Mike Williams and the injury. He's kind of on the Breece Hall timetable right now where they expect him to probably be back by the beginning of the season, but it's also probably going to be a little ramp up there, and he's not necessarily going to be fully 100%. And then there's the confidence factor with a knee, all that stuff that goes into coming back from an injury like that. So they have him, but what is he early? And then they obviously have Xavier Gibson and Jason Brownlee, who they praised yesterday Saleh talked them up, and even said they expect a bounce back year from Allen Lazard.
Yeah.
That all said, you could use another body.
They definitely are adding another receiver. Even if it's not in the first round, this is a deep receiver class. Like I think there's an argument to be made to not drafting a receiver in the first round just because you can find very good guys in the later rounds. The Jets just don't have a history of actually finding the good ones after the first round. Garrett Wilson was their first one they hit on in like forever. So if there's any argument against them waiting, I guess it'd be that. But I thought they should have drafted a receiver after the first round last year. They didn't, which was a mistake, I think. They're very high on Xavier Gibson. He still has a lot to prove in my mind. I think he's a talented kid, and he can be like a slot receiver, gadget guy. But I don't think you can go into the season having him as the number 3 with an injured guy, number 2. Lazard, they can keep talking him up. We know he's not actually a part of in the mix unless Rodgers really builds him back up, which is possible. Jason Brownlee, like they're high on him, but again, you can't go in with like these guys. So Corey Davis is an option. They keep talking up how they welcome him back with open arms and all that stuff. I think he's trying to find another place to go, but if he doesn't, then I could see him coming back. And short of that, you need to add another receiver. I think they know that. I don't know what form that'll take. There are some veterans, they could do the bottom of the barrel like Marquez Valdes-Scantling type guys. Odell Beckham's still on the market. He's probably asking for too much money. They're going to add another receiver. My gut is in the draft, and probably not first round unless one of those 3 guys fall to them, but they can get a really good one in the third round. There's some receivers I like in this class. Roman Wilson from Michigan's a guy who stood out at we should get Dane Brugler on, by the way. I feel like we're
next one
close to that territory
now in the draft.
Yeah. Roman Wilson, there's Malachi Corley. I think he's from Washington State. He's kind of like a slot type receiver. Like there's some intriguing ones there. So they should be able to get an upgrade, and they're going to wind up rolling probably with like 5, 6, or 7 receivers on their roster going into the season. But this is kind of where they stand. So yeah, Mike Williams is a risk. Everybody knows that's like, I'm sure he was very intrigued by the Jets and playing with Rodgers and stuff. But I also think the fact that he didn't leave the Jets facility, I would imagine that part of that was the agent being like, I don't know if we're going to get a better offer than up to $15 million. So we should.
No one
take
else
this
is
deal.
giving you pork roll, man.
And
Yeah,
No
the
one else.
other part of it was the pork roll stand.
Yeah. I mean, that's the real only part. NYJ
Yeah.
Matt, shout out.
Mhm.
But
Good story by you on that whole thing, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Behind the scenes. I love the conversation. Check it out on The Athletic. But the phone call that NYJ Matt had to have with the DoorDash delivery person explaining how to get to the facility and why he needed them to take a photo. And that was pretty
It was smart of him doing that too, because it is, when you plug in the Jets facility on Google Maps, there's like a point where you get to the facility where it has you going like past like where the actual security entrance is. It has you going like to another part of it. And if you've never been, like, people definitely get lost all the time. So he was smart to do that. But although he confused them when he said you're dropping it off for somebody. Yeah, it just played out like hilariously. It was a nice little distraction while there was some negativity around Jets Twitter. So it was a little positive story. So yeah. So Mike Williams, I still think he could be a very, very good player for them. And I've always been intrigued by him, but there is a lot of risk attached there.
All right. A few other notes from Saleh. He said they're not done at, and this came up in the chat too, about a safety and running back.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious, but it was, hearing him say, safety, especially, they only have like two guys that are actually going to play for them on the roster right now, Chuck Clark and Tony Adams. Like I've said on here and I've written about it, like Ashton Davis, they've been operating as if he's not going to return. But like I said, if he doesn't find a role somewhere else or the money he wants somewhere else, I think he'll come back. The safety market has just been very slow to develop. So there are some intriguing veterans. I keep seeing fans like pushing for Justin Simmons. I don't see that happening unless he's really willing to take a huge pay cut and play on close to the minimum, or like an incentive laden type thing. I don't think they're going to aim that high for a safety. That's just not what Joe Douglas does. But there are some intriguing guys in free agency they can still get. And then running back, I've said the whole time, they need a better running back too. It doesn't sound like this is a good running back class in the draft. They like Izzy Abanaconda, but I don't think he showed enough yet that you can like rely on him as Breece's backup. I like Deontay Foreman as an option, but he signed elsewhere. I forget what team he signed with. There are a few other veterans like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Zeke Elliott, I think, actually sneakily makes a lot of sense as a veteran guy, good pass blocker, kind of knows what he's doing. He's kind of like a better version of what Dalvin Cook gave them, I think, like what they thought they were getting in Dalvin Cook. So I'd be intrigued by him. But yeah, I think they need to add a running back, and maybe they add that in the draft, but I think more likely like a veteran type of guy.
And you mentioned Clowney, right?
Yeah.
We already talked about that a little bit. And the other thing was they did say they're sorry about Bryce Huff having,
Yeah. Well, with Clowney, I should say, like, Joe gave an interesting detail where he said, like, they sat in his office for an hour just talking. And he said it was an outstanding visit, but also there's nothing to update. Clowney takes his time, so we'll see what happens there. I know fans have been like on tooth and nail, like waiting to see what happens there, but I don't think there's going to be a rush. So, and also actually something that came out, I forgot about this. I just thought of it now a few days ago, was that Shaq Barrett, who was on the Bucks, was on like a radio show, and he said that he was on the verge of signing with the Jets when the Dolphins came in and gave him an offer, and he factored in state tax, and he thought it was a better opportunity in Miami or whatever. But that made it clear that the Jets have made like edge rusher a priority in free agency, like finding a veteran at a cheap cost. I think Clowney is a much better player than Shaq Barrett at this point of his career, but I think Barrett probably would have been cheaper. So that was interesting, at least. So they clearly have edge rusher on their list of like needs. And he jumps on the list of almost Jets, which is pretty lengthy at this point.
The Dolphins have swooped in a lot, I feel like.
Yeah, the Dolphins definitely do. Including signing actual Jets like Mike White too, and Robbie Anderson. Or Chosen Anderson, sorry.
Jets getting used.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, what else do you have planned for your trip to Florida? You going to go see Mickey?
No, I'm not going to Disney. I'm always tempted to go to Universal because I enjoy Universal quite a bit. There's some cool stuff over there. Harry Potter World. Although the Star Wars land I would have been tempted to go to in Disney, but I don't think I could have done that by myself. I might have been made fun of a little bit. I do love Star Wars.
Got to hang with Connor a little more. Right? So.
Oh yeah, I will.
It used to be downtown Disney. I can't remember what it's called now. Have you been over there?
I think so. Disney's actually only like 20-25 minutes from my hotel. I haven't had time to do anything like that. But the resort we're at or whatever has like a nice pool. And after I write my Zach Wilson story, I'm gonna try and relax a little bit, and then I fly home tomorrow. And we're back to the dead part of the off season where we're sitting around a lot waiting for things to happen or whatever it is. So
you mean spending your days grinding it out.
Yeah.
Contacts and sources. And
I mean, I do that, but I do that from the comfort of my couch. Also,
Yeah.
so.
But OTAs will be here before you know it.
Yeah,
I
you're not
mean,
wrong. At least the
what is
Jets
the
don't
Jets-
start early because they're not a new coach
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah, new teams start April 1st, I believe.
Which is crazy.
Or new team.
We'll
Now
what I
head
will
coaches,
I will
teams
be
and
in
head coaches.
we'll be turning to draft mode, I would say, as we
Yeah.
like turn the calendar, because now the free agency wave has died down. So now it's Zach Wilson and the draft are like the main focuses. So
Jets probably start April 14th or 15th.
yeah, we haven't gotten any.
Probably.
I haven't announced any of the schedules yet. I hope they do soon because it helps me like plan out the summer. But I will say Saleh did say that Rodgers should be available to practice in OTAs. I don't know if he'd show up or not. He might, because he wants to show everybody that he's good on his Achilles. Historically, he says he does not believe in going to OTAs. He even said it after he went last year. So we'll see what he does, but that would add some intrigue, at the very least, give us something to write about in OTAs, which can sometimes be boring.
Yeah.
Especially if they haven't like added like an intriguing rookie or whatever. But so that's something to keep an eye on. They have a bunch of injured guys or guys coming off surgery and stuff that like AVT, Morgan Moses, guys like that who I imagine wouldn't practice, but we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can find some time on Dane Brugler's schedule to get him on the next podcast. I know this is his,
the beast should be
7
dropping
podcasts a day
very soon.
Yeah, the beast is coming. Hear
I think like probably less than 2 weeks from now.
And that will be my Bible for like a month. So I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. All right. This has been fun. We will probably not be back next week, right? Unless something big happens. Maybe we'll have an emergency pod, but otherwise count on Dane sometime between now and the draft in the next episode. And we'll talk to everybody soon. Thanks for joining us on the Can't Wait podcast.